Hey Black Salt Circle, my name is Katie, I'm one of your guides, and today we're going to be talking about the best time of the year, Samhain. Samhain is one of the modern Wheel of the Year Sabbats. It falls right before Yule. It is on October 31st through November 1st, or some people say through November 2nd, or even November 3rd. Samhain has also been practiced since the time of the Iron Age Celtic people. It's one of their 4 quarterly festivals. It's kind of fun because it's actually the one right across from Beltane, which kind of makes me nerd out a little bit because they're like two sides of the same coin almost in a way. The veil is thin. It's thin in different ways, but we'll get to that later. So yes, Samhain is an Irish word. It is pronounced Samhain, which doesn't make sense phonetically to English speakers, but Halloween 2 lied to you. It is not pronounced Samhain. If I hear you pronouncing it Samhain, I will turn you into a pumpkin. It's also acceptable to pronounce it Samhain, especially if you are from England, but yeah, generally Samhain, like Cowan. So in ancient Celtic countries, particularly Ireland, Samhain would have marked the dark half of the year. It takes place right in between the fall equinox and the winter solstice, right in between. So during this time, traditionally, people would let their hearth fires burn out while they were outside collecting the harvest. And then when they were done finishing collecting the harvest, they would go outside where there would be a druid leading a festival, and it would be a big bonfire. Traditionally, it said that they would probably sacrifice livestock at this time. They would dance, and then they would take a piece of that bonfire home with them and relight their hearth. There's some evidence that they may have also used a fire wheel at this time, although traditionally that's more associated with Beltane, so there's not a ton of evidence that they would have used that during Samhain as well, but it's possible. There are some early texts that kind of imply that this was a mandatory, compulsory festival. This would have lasted again from October 31st to about November 2nd, and that at this time people would be required to participate and show themselves to the king or the chieftain of their tribe. Otherwise, they would risk punishment from the gods, usually in the form of death or just a really severe illness. I do think it's worth mentioning, though, that a lot of the information we have about Druidic cultures came from Roman Catholics who were invading and were afraid of them and wanted to bring back negative propaganda. So it's always good to take all of this information with a grain of salt. But that's what some texts indicate. And like I said, after the bonfires, and again, there would be dancing, big celebration, they would take their hearth fire back inside, and then they would usually have a feast, usually in the form of a dumb supper.
Hey, it's future editing Katie over this beautiful still of my face to say that I've recently learned that that term that I just used might be considered by some to be a little bit archaic, kind of outdated, and potentially ableist and offensive to some people. So it might be more kind to use the term silent supper instead. So yes, thank you so much. Sorry for the mistake. Enjoy the rest of the video. Sorry.
Which is when you set the table for yourself and also for your loved ones who have passed or your ancestors. You would invite them to your table, and you would traditionally eat silently and spend that time reflecting about your past loved ones and speaking with them within yourself. So like I mentioned earlier, Samhain is a time of the year when the veil between this world and the other world is very thin. And this is similar to Beltane, although on Beltane, it's typically the veil between this world and the other world, which would be our world and the world of the fair folk. During Samhain, it's more the world between this world and the underworld, or the land of the dead. And so this would be a more active time for spirits of ancestors or loved ones, or what we would traditionally view as ghosts. Although the fair folk are also very active during this time, so keep that in mind. Sorry if you can hear that my heater just turned on, it's cold outside. So because the veil was so thin at this time, that's why it's said that many ancient people would use this time to dress up as scary creatures to ward off evil spirits that might be crossing through the veil, or maybe not evil, but malicious. It's also said that modern day trick-or-treating, because Samhain is Halloween, if you hadn't caught on, it's also said that modern day trick-or-treating would have emerged because the Irish immigrants of the time who were coming here because they were undergoing famine in their own country would have brought over their traditions, and it said that there would be mummers who would go from door to door singing to the spirits of the dead. It's kind of like Christmas caroling, but for Samhain. And in exchange, people would hand them Samhain cakes, People would play pranks at this time and then blame the spirits or the fair folk. So, trick or treat. There's also a really fun legend that explains the jack-o'-lantern. In Ireland and Scotland, they had a legend of a man called Stingy Jack, who was just a mess. And he would go around playing tricks on people. He was said to have played tricks even on the devil himself. And so, as punishment, when he died, both heaven and hell were like, you are a nuisance. You're not allowed in. So he was forced to roam the earth. The devil gave him a burning coal as his one and only gift to light his way. And so he carved a turnip, a face into a turnip, and put the coal in it as his own little lantern. And so then when the Irish people and Scottish people brought this to the Americas, that's when we would have taken that tradition and made it with pumpkins instead, because they're more readily available here. So that's kind of fun. Also in Irish mythology, it's said that the Second Battle of Moytura, which was the battle between the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians, which the Tuatha Dé Danann are the members of the Irish pantheon. Not all of them. The Cailleach wasn't a member of the Tuatha Dé Danann, but several Irish deities like the Dagda, Brigid, the Morrigan, Manana MacLear, they all would have been members of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the children of the goddess Danu. The Tuatha Dé Danann fought their mortal enemies at this time, the Fomorians and Firbolg at this time, and it's said that that battle, which was huge, it's very cool if you want to look into that mythology yourself, but it's said that this took place over Samhain, so that's kind of cool. There's also a legend called the Adventures of Nera, which would have taken place during the time of Queen Maeve. So Nera was a soldier during Queen Maeve's reign, and the king basically dared him to put a willow branch at the foot of some corpses, and he goes on this whole journey. It's very cool. He encounters spirits of the dead. He also encounters fair folk. It's wild. It's fun to look up. Some creatures that you may encounter during this time, specifically from Celtic mythology and folklore, include the puka, which is a spirit. It's a member of the fair folk who would come in and gather harvest offerings. There is a terrifying group of creatures which are also a member of the fair folk called the slua, or the wild hunt, that you may encounter at this time. I always say if it suddenly gets really cold and you hear the sound of dogs, go inside. But it's said that the slua would steal people's souls, basically, so that's really fun. There are the Dullahan, which are headless horsemen, and then there's the Lady Gwyn, who's a headless lady with a black pig who would just go around scaring people. There's also, I'm sure you've heard of this one, I don't like to say the name for reasons I'll get into in a second, but the Screaming Woman who foretells, death. It's also interesting to see related festivals or holidays similar to Samhain, such as Dia de los Muertos. This is celebrated November 1st through November 2nd, traditionally practiced in Mexico. This is a holiday celebrating and remembering the dead, ancestors, and loved ones who have passed. There's also All Saints' Day on November 1st and All Souls' Day on November 2nd. It's funny, the Catholic Church really wanted to bring pagans into their religion, and so, as I'm sure many of you know, they would take pagan practices and put them into their own traditions to kind of lure people in, and so All Saints' Day was kind of Pope Gregory's answer to Samhain. And today, many modern witches celebrate Samhain as one of the 8 Sabbats of the Wheel of the Year. Generally, people will use this time to acknowledge their ancestors or people who have passed. Some may use it to work with the fair folk. It's also considered by many to be the witchy new year, so you might consider blowing cinnamon into your house for prosperity, or doing some new year cleaning. You might decide to do some divination work to kind of see what the upcoming year might hold for you. And just really, the veil is very thin, so it's a good time for divination. It's a good time for communication. And of course, many modern pagans or witches will also still have bonfires. So now, of course, on to some correspondences for this Sabbath. You would have colors such as black, gold, orange, purple, red, silver, yellow. Herbs include, it's not really herbs, but acorns, oak leaves. You would also have herbs like allspice, bay leaves, cinnamon, cloves, any kind of dried leaf, garlic, ginger, mandrake, marigolds, mums, mugwort, nettle, passion flower, pine, red roses, rosemary, sage, sweetgrass, tarragon, just a ton of verbs. Animals would include bats, cats, crows, jackals, moths, rats, ravens, spiders, vultures, the creepy crawlies, we love them. Foods might include pomegranates, because of Persephone, pumpkins, turnips, apples, onion, cider, corn, meats, if you're into that kind of thing, mead, mulled wine, nuts, squash. Crystals would be black obsidian, bloodstone, carnelian, iron, jasper, moonstone, onyx, smoky quartz, silver, labradorite, garnet, hematite, amethyst. And then some deities that are really prominent at this time include Anubis, Baba Yaga, Cernunnos, Hades, Persephone, Hecate, the Morrigan, Kali, Shiva, Thanatos, Hel, that's spelled H-E-L, not H-E-L-L. And some ways that you personally can celebrate are you can set up your Samhain altar, which I haven't done. This is my regular altar, but I plan to in the next couple of days. Your altar can have pumpkins, bones. I know some witches like to collect bones, so ethically sourced ones, please. Bones, you can put up your deities, tarot cards. If you have anything that reminds you of past loved ones, that might be good to put on your altar as well. Now is a very good time for shadow work. Like I said, veil is very thin, so working with ancestors, working with fair folk. I do want to take this time to talk about a pet peeve specifically of mine, and that is a lot of people will use these terms here, and that's okay, because some people say that that comes from fair folk. It's just a shortening of the term fair folk, but there's many witches who work with them specifically or who have studied them, scholars who have studied the mythology behind them, who suggest that these words are kind of offensive to them. They find them a little bit rude, and that also they might attract their attention. So I tend to try to say the fair folk, or the good neighbors, the gentry, the good people, the shining ones, things like that. Which is why I didn't say the word earlier, because their name in Irish is this. It's pronounced like the female pronoun she, and the Irish word for woman is this. So you would put them together and have this, which has been turned into this, and I don't like to say the Irish word for them either. It's just, I'm superstitious. You can do your practice however you'd like and however you see fit. Obviously it's a personal thing, but it is something to maybe read up on or look up, especially during this time of year when the veil is thin. I like to be cautious, the Slua are scary. But yes, you might decide to work with fair folk or leave an offering for them. You might want to leave offerings for past loved ones. It could be nice to visit them if they're in a cemetery, or spend some time outside talking with them. You can have a dumb supper of your own, again, where you sit in silence and you have dinner and you set a place at the dinner table for your loved ones, your past loved ones, or ancestors, or spirits of the land. You might have a bonfire, pretty fun, or you might, like I said, do a yearly divination just to see what's coming up. And of course, as always, the way to celebrate anything when you're a witch is to take a walk outside. So Black Salt Circle will be celebrating this year by meeting up on November 1st at 7 p.m. We'll be starting with some family-friendly activities. You can bring your kids. We'll take them trick-or-treating, give them some candy, have a nice time, and then we'll have spooky time only. So children will leave, and we'll talk about ancestry work. We'll talk about dumb suppers, maybe working with some pendulums. We might tell some scary stories as well. It'll be a good time. We very much hope to see you there. And again, in this video, we focused a lot on Celtic cultures because Samhain is traditionally a Celtic holiday, but there's many cultures that have similar celebrations that it's always worth looking up and educating yourself about. So I very much encourage you to do that. Also, 2 fun facts. Samhain is my birthday, so I'm the queen, and David and I have a cat named Samhain, and this is her. We hope to see you on November 1st. Have a wonderful Samhain, happy witchy new year, and blessed be.